Let's talk about Justice. Minister Ronald Lamola, who has also warned the United Nations about the credibility of the ICC, the International Criminal Court. He says it's at risk of losing its credibility unless it investigates all crimes equally. Now, this does come as South Africa's government is grappling with what to do about the ICC's arrest warrant for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's try and get a sense of how this could be handled. I'm joined by Dr. Sinkala, an expert in international relations, joining us all the way from Kitwe in Zambia this morning. Hello to you, Doctor. I appreciate your time. We'll talk about what South Africa's president should be doing come August. First, I want to get your thoughts on our Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, saying the ICC is losing credibility. You agree with that statement?
To some extent, yes, definitely, Gareth. And once again, thank you so much for having me. The International Criminal Court has been exposed by, selective justice in the way they prosecute matters, as we have likely seen. In fact, no sitting president has ever been arrested. The ISIS statute, the Rome Statute, has to be read with the respect of the sovereignty of countries on how they can engage a sitting president. Among others, you can see that even some of those who are in the United Nations Security Council are not part and parcel of the International Criminal Court. They haven't rectified that into their set. That also brings to the conclusion that their credibility in handling matters equally, to provide justice as per its formation, has been compromised. Many crimes, atrocities and aggression crimes that are supposed to preside on have been exposed in the world, especially coming from the United States of America, how they have gone through countries and made killings at will, and also Palestine, like what Minister Lamola mentioned. Those hasn't been prosecuted, but others states they would like to prosecute that. Especially others have cited that ICC actually targets especially African countries and those small European countries and nations that intimidate the United Nations.
The example used by the Justice Minister, and allow me to quote, Doctor, if you don't mind, he was referring to the slow pace of investigation by the ICC into what he calls the atrocities over in the Palestinian territories as well. And this is what I want to quote. This is from the Justice Minister himself, and I quote, "We must treat all crimes that shock the conscience of humanity across the globe with equal indignation, no matter what the colour or creed of the people affected." Knowing South Africa government's stance on Palestine and Israel, that can't be a surprising example to use to try and paint the picture of the ICC as not being fair.
Of course, Gareth, I wouldn't say totally that it's a slow pace of investigating the crimes in Palestine against humanity. But what I would say is the selective justice by the International Criminal Court, the ignoring of those crimes which have been perpetrated in Palestine, they simply shows that it's not a lack of the slow pace of being in that motion of slow motion in investigating those matters. It's lack of interest in pursuing those crimes against humanity in Palestine. You can see how they reacted very quickly in terms of President Putin, the Russia invasion in Ukraine, and the crimes of displacement of children and crimes of humanity that they have labeled against him. It was acted in a very short space of time with record high, amongst other cases which they have investigated.
I want to just turn our attention as well, because this all is centering around what could potentially be the Russian president, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, coming to South Africa for BRICS in August. There's a call for the president of Russia to be arrested if he were to set foot on South African soil. The South African president has gone out and said in an affidavit that if a sitting president, in this case Vladimir Putin, were arrested on South African soil, it would be a declaration of war. Where do you stand on that comment?
I think in the legal perspective, I totally agree with that statement from the President and the Justice Minister of South Africa, because, there is processes and procedures, including for diplomats who are representing nations and outside nations. South Africa, they are not at liberty of just issuing an arrest. An arrest must be lawful. An arrest must be procedurally correct for one to effect that arrest, especially when dealing with bilateral relationships with another country. And now this is to the extent of the sitting president. It has never happened before, and I don't know how ICC, International Criminal Court, can justify the arrest of the sitting president of another country. Yes, there was a High Court ruling, actually Supreme Court of ruling in South Africa after the Al-Bashir saga, that he was supposed to be arrested. But I'm waiting for a time for that case to be taken to the Constitutional Court, to be decided on the interest of the Constitution. South Africa is governed by the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. It's not the law of the statutes. It's not the law of other countries or foreign international law, but it is controlled by the Constitution of South Africa. I can refer also and cite Section 172 of the Constitution of South Africa, which stipulates that all law must be consistent with the Constitution, and any law that is not consistent with the Constitution of South Africa must be interpreted to be invalidated by the courts of law. So the International Criminal Court processes in terms of arresting a sitting president. Yes, crimes has been committed in Ukraine, crimes of aggression, which simply falls under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. But I feel personally, from the legal perspective, that procedurally and unlawfully issuing of arrest warrant for the sitting president, that breaks the tie. South Africa risks, yes, to declare the war against Russia. If they can arrest a sitting president, whom the Russians will send to South Africa to attend this BRICS summit. It won't be justified, especially the relationship that South Africa has in the BRICS realm.
Doctor, let me ask you very briefly, as I say goodbye to you, just a brief answer if you could. Is there not a point then, if we are more concerned as a sovereign nation about how the Russian president, the Russian government could view us and other governments that we may be hosting, which could have issues with the ICC, shouldn't we rather as a country leave the ICC and the Rome Statute?
Gareth, South Africa attempted to leave the Roman Statute for, I think, on 3 occasions. And I think one of the reasons is the selective prosecution in terms of their dealing with the issues of cases in the world. But it hasn't been an easy task to leave. In fact, I think South Africans will remember in the world that President Cyril Ramaphosa came up on the stage and mentioned that they are leaving the International Criminal Court until the legal department or the Justice Department interpreted that you cannot just announce that you are leaving. There are processes and procedures that has to be taken. But I think this will be historic. We shall wait and see what will happen, whether or not President Putin will fly in South Africa in August on the 22nd to attend the BRICS summit. And now we can only, try to interpret, as the law is very difficult to interpret. It has to be applied, in the sense of respecting other sovereign states and laws as well.
Yeah, Doctor, it's been a huge pleasure having you with us. I think you've explained perfectly what the dilemma actually is here within the context of international law and our own sovereignty as a country. Dr. Charles Sinkala from Zambia this morning joining us, international relations expert. Certainly hope I get to hear from the good doc again. I enjoyed how he was able to unpack the issue so nicely for us.